Thanks, Mr. Chairman. It's been a long time. I don't have a lot of memories about what it was like to be in the first grade. But I do know this. My 6-year-old granddaughter, who goes to a first grade public school in Brooklyn, New York, has a memory of what happened after Parkland, Florida. She told me about it. The teacher told the first graders in her school that if there's a shooter in your school, stay away from the windows and get down on the floor. Is there any sane person in America who believes that's what the Founding Fathers had in mind with the Second Amendment? That's why we're here today. That's why the students from Parkland have inspired students across the United States of America to finally stand up and say to us, to the politicians, enough. Enough. I just have to say, and I put it in as straight a terms as I can, the 17 lives in Parkland, Florida are worth a lot more than the weak response we've heard from this committee and from the President. I believe when 97% of the American people agree that we should have universal background checks to keep guns out of the hands of people who misuse them, and the Students' March, we ought to listen. When overwhelmingly Americans say we've got to get rid of assault weapons and these high-capacity magazine clips, we ought to listen. When they tell us that the sale of long guns, rifles, and others to people under the age of 21 is dangerous, we ought to listen. And instead what we have, sadly, are weak responses all around. And why? Well, in a lucid moment a couple weeks ago, the President identified it. Politicians are petrified by the National Rifle Association. And the question we face, very honestly, is whether we're petrified by them. I'm not. I don't get their money, I don't get their support, and I don't care to ever have it. And the question is whether even members of the NRA will step up and join us in doing something about this. A lot of them have come to me privately and said, we've got to do something. Members of the NRA, they understand it. Let me ask you, Mr. Bowditch, I am sure for the families that are here, what you've said was heartbreaking. The tips sent to your agency did not result in follow-up. Didn't stop this Nicholas Cruz from his deadly rampage. But I did a calculation, and maybe I'm wrong on this. You can tell me if I'm wrong on this. But in your testimony, you suggested the number of telephone calls and emails which the FBI receives, which purport to identify some threat. And as best I can determine, it's about 4,100 a day, every day of the year. And the 160 staff people that you identified working in this agency, receiving these calls, would each receive each day 26 tips on possible threats. We've been meeting here for about 100 minutes, and it strikes me that each one of those employees would have received 5 tips in the time that we've been sitting here this morning. Let me ask you this question. What authority does the FBI have to deny a gun sale to a person based on information that the person has threatened to commit a mass shooting if the person has not been convicted of a crime or does not otherwise fall within prohibited categories from buying a gun under federal or state law?
It's a good question, Senator. If I could return to 2 things. If I could quickly return to the call center. Some of those calls are nuisance calls from repeat callers, so they can quickly sift through those. Others, however, are very challenging for these folks to listen to. Sometimes someone will begin a conversation. I went out immediately after this and sat down, and I listened to a number of our and sat with a few of our call takers to listen to those calls. They're challenging, and those folks, they work hard out there, and they're making judgment decisions. In this case, we've been 100% clear, we do not believe the right decision was made.
In this case, clearly the FBI failed. What I'm asking you is what authority does the FBI have under the circumstances I've just mentioned if they receive a credible threat that a person has threatened to commit a mass shooting?
Good question. So I talked about this briefly earlier. Do I think we could have changed the course of the outcome here? I don't know. Again, anytime we can get in front of this person is a positive thing, because he now knows the FBI is sitting down with me, sometimes along with a local detective, to discuss these types of behaviors. As far as authorities, he purchased these weapons legally. I don't know the mental health laws in the state of Florida, but it would have been, sure, a nice opportunity for us to get in front of him and take along a state or local officer, so that even if we did not have the authority to do anything for him, we could have at least made sure that they knew. Now we know, in hindsight, we do know that they knew about him as well.
What you've just heard is a common sense suggestion to change the law to put authority in the hands of the FBI and others so that they can stop someone who has threatened to commit a mass shooting. The laws in this country are not clear on the subject, and they should be crystal clear. So should the laws when it comes to ATF, that deliberately ties the hands of this agency with paper records. Do you know why they're paper records? Because the gun lobby doesn't want an electronic background check. And do you know why we don't share information on the gun dealers in the suburbs of Chicago that are flooding us with crime guns? Because the T-Hart Amendment limits the distribution of that information, a law put in by the gun lobby. This is our responsibility.